All right, so get ready because today we're diving into some seriously thought-provoking stuff. We're talking about the future, and not just any future, but one predicted by, well, a Polish clairvoyant.
A clairvoyant.
Yeah, his name is Krzysztof Jackowski, and he's got a pretty big following on YouTube. He shares all these, well, visions he has about what could come. We're going to be looking at one of his videos, specifically the one where he talks about, you ready for this? A future dominated by automation.
Okay, that's interesting. I've always been fascinated by predictions of the future, especially when they involve technology. It's like a glimpse into a world that could be.
Exactly. And this one is pretty wild.
So what does he see? What does this automated future look like?
Well, for starters, he uses this term hibernation to describe how humans will exist in this future. Kind of creepy, right?
Hibernation. That does sound a little ominous. What does he mean by that?
He basically sees a world where, like, everything is automated, like, to an extreme degree. You know, like stores without cashiers, a workforce where robots have pretty much replaced people.
Wow. So like picture this. You walk into a grocery store and there's no one there. No cashiers, no stockers, just rows and rows of shelves and these robots zipping around, grabbing your groceries. I mean, it's kind of like something out of a movie, right?
Right. It's wild. But Jackowski presents it as like a real possibility. And it's not just shopping. It's like every job, every task is handled by machines.
Okay, yeah, I see where the hibernation thing comes in. If humans aren't working, what are they doing? It's almost like he's suggesting we'd become passive observers in this future.
Yeah, like constantly plugged into technology but detached from the physical world. Almost like living in a simulation, you know?
Right. And that's where things get really interesting, I think. Because it makes you wonder, what happens to our sense of purpose, our motivation?
Right. I mean, some people might love the idea of not having to work, but what happens when that becomes the norm? How do we define ourselves if we're not contributing, not creating, not building?
It's a question that goes way beyond just like economics, you know? It's about like what it means to be human.
Totally. And it gets even trickier when Jakowski starts talking about how this technology might merge with our minds, like directly.
Whoa, hold on, merge with our minds, as in like our thoughts and everything.
Yeah, he sees a future where, like, advanced technology can interface with our brains, maybe even influence our emotions, you know, like treat depression or even control criminal behavior.
I mean, on one hand, that sounds amazing, right? The potential to heal mental illness, reduce crime, even just make people happier. It's mind-blowing.
Yeah, but then you got to think, if we can technologically manipulate our minds, where do we draw the line? What happens to free will?
It's like, what if happiness just becomes a setting you can adjust? What does that even mean for our understanding of what it means to be human?
Heavy stuff, right? And, you know, Jakowski doesn't think this is all some distant future either. He actually uses this story about himself trying to buy flowers, and the electronic payment system kept glitching, and he couldn't buy them.
Really?
Yeah. And his point is, like, we're already so dependent on technology, even for simple things. What happens when it becomes even more powerful and complex?
That's a good point. He's bringing it back to something we can all relate to, like everyday frustrations of technology, and then, scaling it up to this whole picture of a future where we're almost like controlled by these systems.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder, is all this progress actually making things better? Or are we, like, sacrificing something important in the process?
Right. It's like we're trying to make life easier, more efficient, maybe even happier, but at what cost? Jackowski really makes you think about the potential downsides, the things we might be overlooking in our pursuit of, all this advancement.
He even throws out this idea that humans might have actually reached this level of technology before, like in past eras, but then something happened, like a cataclysmic event that wiped us out.
Wow, that's a pretty heavy thought. It makes you wonder, are we destined to repeat the mistakes of the past? Like, is there something inherently self-destructive about our pursuit of progress?
Yeah. And, that's just the tip of the iceberg. Jakowski's vision also includes all these predictions about geopolitical shifts, like major changes in power dynamics and even the possibility of a global conflict.
Okay, now I really want to hear about that. Let's dive into those predictions next.
Let's do it.
Okay, so where do these geopolitical shifts fit into all of this?
Well, it's like they're all connected. Jakowski sees these huge changes happening on the world stage alongside all this crazy technological advancement. It's like a whole new world order, pretty much.
So what kind of changes are we talking about?
Like, he specifically talks about Europe being dominated by Islam.
Really?
Yeah. And Russia, like, shrinking, mostly confined to Siberia.
Wow. That's a pretty dramatic shift in power. What about, like, the U.S.? What does he see happening there?
He talks about these massive waves of Asian migration into North America, like completely changing the demographics.
So basically, the world as we know it, like, completely transformed. Different cultures and different power structures. I mean, it's hard to even picture what that would be like, you know?
Yeah, it's not just like a peaceful transition either. He throws a global war into the mix, too.
A war? You mean like on top with all this other stuff?
Yeah, like it all kind of culminates in this huge conflict. And not just any war, but one with like super advanced weaponry. He talks about weapons that can just like instantly incinerate targets.
Okay, now that is terrifying. Like, are we talking nuclear weapons or something even more advanced?
It sounds like something beyond that, like something we could barely even imagine. And he predicts that China is going to be like a major player in this war. Like they're going to get betrayed by other nations, and it's going to lead to this huge, devastating conflict.
Whoa. Okay, so we've got technological hibernation, a shifting world order, and a global war with futuristic weapons. Anything else we need to add to this picture of the future?
Well, yeah, he also sees this trend towards totalitarianism, like on a global scale.
Totalitarianism? Like, you mean like authoritarian governments taking over everywhere?
Yeah, he even uses Trump as an example, like how his actions, kind of shook things up, created this instability that could lead to strongmen taking advantage.
Hold on, I thought we were supposed to stay neutral in politics.
Right, right, we are. But I think his point is more about like the potential for things to get out of control, for leaders to exploit chaos and grab power.
Okay, yeah, I see what you mean. It's less about Trump specifically and more about the broader trend toward, like, authoritarianism.
Exactly. He's basically saying like, pay attention, people, because things are shifting and not necessarily in a good way.
It's kind of a lot to take in, you know? Like, we're talking about some pretty heavy stuff here. What are we supposed to do with all of this? Like, how do we even begin to process these predictions? I know, right? It's like this weird mix of, like, hope, of fear. Like, the future could be amazing, but it could also be really, really bad.
Exactly. And it kind of makes you feel helpless. Like, what can we even do about any of this? It's all so big, you know?
Yeah, I get that. It's easy to feel overwhelmed. But I think, even though Jackowski is picketing this kind of bleak picture, he's not saying it's inevitable. He's not saying this is definitely going to happen.
So, like, what's his point then, if it's not just about scaring us?
I think it's more about awareness, like he's saying, hey, these are some possibilities, some potential paths we could go down. Pay attention, be aware, and maybe we can avoid the bad stuff.
So, like, what? We just got to be more mindful of the choices we're making now.
Yeah, I think so. And, be open to having these kinds of conversations, these like big picture discussions about where we're headed as a society.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. But, like, how do we even know what choices to make? It's not like we have a crystal ball or anything.
He actually uses this analogy about driving a car at night.
Driving a car.
Yeah, he says it's like we can only see as far as our headlights allow, right? But that doesn't mean the road ends there. We have to keep driving, keep making decisions, even though we can't see the whole picture.
Oh, I see. So, like, we just got to be careful, pay attention to the signs, and try to make the best choices we can with the information we have.
Exactly. And, be prepared to adjust course if things aren't working out.
That's a good point. It's like we don't have to have all the answers, but we do have to be aware, be engaged.
Right. And that engagement can take a lot of different forms, like it could be as simple as talking to your friends and family about these issues or supporting organizations that are working on, promoting ethical technology or fighting for democracy.
I guess every little bit helps, right?
I think so. It's like we might not be able to single-handedly prevent a global war, but we can contribute to creating a culture that values peace, that values dialogue, that values, responsible innovation.
That's a good way to put it. So I guess, like, even though Jackowski's vision is kind of intense, to say the least, there's also a message of hope in there, right? Like, we have the power to shape our own future.
Absolutely. That's the key takeaway, I think. The future isn't set in stone. It's a constantly evolving thing, and we all play a role in shaping it.
So what would you say, like, the one thing you want our listeners to remember from all of this?
I'd say it's the power of choice. Like Jack Calavi's vision, whether you believe in it or not, it's not a prophecy. It's a set of possibilities. And we have the power to choose which possibilities become reality.
That's a pretty empowering thought, actually. It's easy to get lost in all the doom and gloom, but ultimately we're not powerless. We can make a difference.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to have these conversations, to explore these ideas, to think critically about the future we're creating. Because, the future doesn't just happen to us, we make it.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, folks, that's our deep dive into the predictions of Krzysztof Jackowski. It's a lot to chew on, but hopefully you're walking away from this feeling, informed, maybe a little bit challenged, but ultimately empowered to think about your own role in shaping the future. Thanks for joining us on this wild ride.